What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me my two great co-hosts, Federico Perez and Ralph Hanna. And guys, here we are. We're right towards the end of August. Obviously, all the major European leagues have restarted, or are going to restart today with Germany kicking off. Obviously, there's no Paraguayans playing there, but of course, we've had quite a lot of news actually in the last week that we've recorded. Obviously, we saw Gustavo Alfaro officially become the Paraguay national team manager. He was officially announced last week after we recorded in his presentation. We also saw on the same day Ramon Sosa officially announced as a 9 and 4 player, another Paraguayan player. Of course, we had spoken about this last week, but he was officially announced by the club. We'll see when he makes his debut for the tricky trees, as they call it over there in England. Obviously, we had some Copa Sudamericana action happen in the Paraguayan teams, the big Superclasico that happened on the weekend as well, what that means for Olimpia and for Libertad heading in towards the league, campaign. And in the Libertadores, I think all eyes are really on not the Paraguayan teams, because there are no Paraguayan teams in this one, but one Paraguayan team in particular got a positive result, with Olimpia just keeping their eyes on their qualification for the Club World Cup that happening next year. We saw São Paulo eliminate Nacional, which means that it's really going to be dependent on now one of these teams. And it's, kind of the really the irony of ironies, a Cerro Porteño, ex-Cerro Porteño, Damián Boadilla, scoring the goal to knock out Nacional, helping the traditional rival basically have a chance to qualify for the upcoming Club World Cup, which is still in contention for Olimpia. So yeah, a lot it's been going on. I don't know where to even start. I'll go to Ralph first, because of course we've talked about the men's game for just a couple seconds, but also the women's game has had some good news as well, or at least some exciting news coming up with the big tournament happening very soon.
Yeah, right. The under-20s women's team, the only side making World Cups recently, so they're on their way now to Colombia, whereas the women's under-20s World Cup, they got a really tough group. They've got Morocco, Spain, and of course the USA. So it's going to be a really tough challenge for the team that, if you remember, they came second in the Sudamericano. In that final group, Brazil won all their games, but then Paraguay and Colombia were both tied on 8 points. Their key player, Fatima Acosta, she's the big star. She's just won the under-20s tournament in Brazil with her team, Sao Paulo. So she's on a high, and she's going to be the key player if anything can happen. So good luck to them as they make their way to Colombia for this World Cup. First game's on Sunday, by the way, against Morocco.
Definitely keep an eye on that, and we'll be keeping an eye on what happens for Paraguay in this group. And Fede, yeah, going to you now. I mean, I don't see a happy face on that one, because after what you've seen from the Superclasico and even from what we saw midweek, not been good for predictions, has it been for you, Fede?
Thank you for reminding me. Hi, Roberto. Hi, Ralph. Hi to everyone listening to Guarani Vision. And it is true. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that too much because I was leaving the Super Classico behind. I was trying to think about Dos de Mayo, who is the leader of the Clausura, the surprising leader, I would say, up to this point after 6 games played, as we're heading into week 7 of this Clausura. Exciting games happening. I think Dos de Mayo still has to play against Libertad. They still got to play against Olimpia. They still got to play against big teams in their calendar. So it's going to look very interesting for their calendar. As for the Super Classico, yes, another tie. I think it was you, Roberto, that hit it on the predictions on the Super Classico. So props to you. I was close to my prediction actually, because Olimpia was winning it late in the game, and it was pretty much Aguayo coming through for his coach and for his team, making the difference, coming in as a sub. And he's such a young player, and we're definitely going to talk about those guys and everything that's been happening this week, right? A lot of people were actually watching the Libertadores, just as you mentioned. Olimpia fans, especially that Sao Paulo game against Nacional, they needed a hand from the Brazilian team, and they got it. And now they wait for another Brazilian team to win it all, or maybe even River, right? I think those are the chances that Olimpia still has to play that World Cup next year. The first time it will be played in that format, and with big teams, huge European teams being there, and with so much money going around, which is something that Olimpia really needs to pay off their debts and get off the situation that they've been pretty much on for the last 3-4 years. We definitely got to talk about that. And as for the Ameliano Libertad showdown, it did come out to penalties. It was a fun one. It was an exciting one. It was a very cold night. It is still very cold as we're heading into the weekend here in Paraguay, and it was a rainy night. It was a nasty night, to be honest. It wasn't the prettiest of football because there were no goals in 90 minutes, but we did have very good chances. I think Ameliano had enough chances to go through, but they weren't able to make it happen, especially on the penalty shootout. Talk about Martin Silva watching those balls leave the stadium pretty much, right? I mean, the Amelianos just couldn't put it in there. They had 3 chances, I believe, in the penalty shootout, but it was Libertad coming through with somebody that they know and they pretty much missed during this whole time. I'm talking about Daniel Garnero, who is back on road with Libertad, and they move on into Sudamericana.
Yeah, just going back on the Libertadores, Fede, it's not just any Brazilian team. It's only 2, well, 3 technically. Yeah, actually now it's 2 that can kind of help Olimpia in this case. It would be either Fluminense or Flamengo. But there's also Atlético Mineiro, there's Botafogo, there's São Paulo. So as much as São Paulo has kind of helped Nacional in that kind of they help them try to edge closer to qualification, they can still knock them out immediately. So they have that. You still have Peñarol and Colo Colo as well. They'll be in this race as well. But yeah, as long as Olimpia is going to cheer on River Plate, Fluminense, or Flamengo to become champions, then they will be in. But the other 5 that I had mentioned as well, if they win the Copa Libertadores, then they are not going. So yeah, I think a lot of Olimpia fans will be cheering on both the Rio teams and River Plate in this entire campaign of the rest of the Copa Libertadores, with the quarterfinals starting very, very soon. So yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And yeah, obviously it would be a big deal for Paraguay football for them to qualify to this inaugural Club World Cup played in this format. So really interesting to see what happens there as we switch gears now to what happened in the Copa Sudamericana, because certainly we did see 2 Paraguayan teams participate last night. One of them would have to go home, and the one team that does go home is the Sportivo Ameliano. Unfortunately, after a really good 1-1 draw in the first game, it was scoreless after 90 minutes in the return leg yesterday at the Defensores del Chaco. Went to penalties. Actually, a very entertaining penalty shootout, Ralph. I want to go to you first on this one, because you did call that it would be a very tight game, that Libertad would have to rely on kind of the experience helping them in this. Who missed the 2 penalties for Libertad to, even though they won, who missed the 2 penalties? Oscar Cardoso and Cristian Riveros, 2 veteran players on this Libertad side. So biggest irony of ironies, but yeah, it was Ameliano who kind of blew it at the end. They missed their last 2 penalties. Mais who missed the last one, and it's Libertad who ended up going through, even though, a lot could be questioned about them getting there. And boy, do they have a big task ahead of them against Cruzeiro, who just eliminated Boca Juniors as well last night.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, firstly, just the preview to the game, as Fede spoke about, Libertad and Ameliano played at the weekend in the league, a 0-0 draw, and that was the end of Galliano. I think people were just upset with Galliano at that point. It was 7 games that Libertad had gone without a win. Things just weren't clicking, things weren't going, and with Daniel Garnero, they're ready to kind of come back and take over again. They just pulled the trigger very quickly. Galliano went, Garnero was in, and he was on the bench for the game, the Copa Sudamericana game. And it's funny, right? It ends in a 0-0 draw again. So 3 ties in a row in these 3 games they've had. And it was really like in a way, a classic performance you would expect from Libertad, because they had about 70% possession. They looked in control, but then at the same time, they weren't making great chances. I'm trying to think of a really good chance they had. Oh, Marcelo Fernandez, I think, hits the post, right? But generally, they weren't, for all the possession, they weren't doing much with the ball. And then it was, as you would have expected, Ameliano trying to find little moments on the break. And so the game almost played out how you would expect, but very, very cold, very wet, no goals. And so you end up in the penalty shootout. And usually when you see the team that shoots first usually wins, which did end up happening, but that's very rare when they miss their first penalty, which is also what happened, because Oscar Cardoso, his like trademark penalty as hard as he can down the middle, and Rossi sticks a leg out and saves it. And then through as the penalty shootout develops, you have those two more misses from each side. So you get Julio Gonzalez has the chance to win the game, right? To take it away. He's the final penalty taker for Ameliano, and he just misses the target. it goes way over. I think I'm trying to remember now, but I think Silva hasn't gone the right way. So I think Silva's gone the wrong way, but the penalty is just all over the bar, which was the second time that had happened for them. Then Mais misses his one after Ivan Franco had scored, and somehow Libertad have found themselves in this next round. But I think, like you say, Roberto, they need to play much better against Cruzeiro. I mean, the way the team is performing at the moment, because this really is not a win officially. 90 minutes is a tie, so that's 8 games now which they haven't won. I think Tacuary is the last time they won a match. So they really need to start picking up some momentum again and finding their way through. One important thing I think for Garnero and for Libertad is that Ernesto Caballero will be back. He was suspended for this game. I think he has 3 yellow cards, so he was suspended. He'll be back, and he's an important piece of Garnero's team, as I think we criticized a bit in the Copa America, thinking about him in the national team, but definitely at the local level, he's been such a key player. So maybe with him coming back in with Garnero back, you'll start to see this Libertad team that we know and have seen before that can pick up wins and start really moving. And by the way, just while we're thinking about it, they're not out of the local league. They're only 6 points behind Olimpia. They're 8 behind the leaders, but they're only 6 points behind Olimpia. We've seen Libertad catch that up very easily. So don't count them out now that Garnero is back.
Yeah, definitely. Don't count them out now with Daniel Garnero. And after getting this win, and yeah, this team has not looked good lately. That's why they haven't been able to win. It's been 8 straight, like Ralph said, but you are expecting players to pick up. You are expecting Daniel Garnero to know what he's doing. Pretty much it's the same roster when he left. This team didn't sign players late. After he left, Galeano didn't have that opportunity. They didn't give him the wallet and to go out there and bring whatever he wanted. And he pretty much had to stick with the veterans and try to bring up a couple of young players, which he did, I believe. And he left with several titles. I mean, he won 3 titles, I believe, with this club. So he did do a couple of things. It's just that the bar was too high. I mean, when Garnero left, I mean, they were winning just everything and they were dominating in the local scene. So now you were seeing that this team got cold, that the veterans were responding to the coach, and Daniel Garnero was available. So in another situation, they probably wouldn't have done this. They probably would have waited till the end of the year. Because Sudamericana was not what they were aiming for this year. They were going for the Libertadores, at least to get to the latter stages, but they fell into the Sudamericana and they had this showdown against Ameliano, which is still seen by the big teams here in Paraguay as a small club. So they feel like they can beat Ameliano, but Ameliano has built up a name after doing it against Olimpia, after doing it against the big teams. They feel very confident facing whoever they face. And I believe they played really smart football in these 2 games against Libertad. They tied him up and on the counter attack, they had several opportunities. Even last night, I mean, Fred is a very fast guy. He had an opportunity on the counter attack, which was stalled by Martin Silva. Richard Torales had several opportunities. Somebody that also missed his penalty on the shootout when Ameliano had the opportunity to put it down for them. And you hate to see it for those guys, because especially on shootout, right? When you miss those very important penalties, and when there's so much at stake, when there's so much money at stake also, because there was a lot of money, especially for Ameliano players, if they went through, you got to feel for these guys, right? Because you don't know how it's going to affect them personally, how it's going to affect the rest of their career. I want to see them come back, but it is the end of the road for Ameliano, looking at it from their side. As for Libertad, I think this is the first step they needed to take. I mean, it starts all over again for them. Just like Ralph said, they do have a certain distance between the first team in the Clausura and them right now, but they can still do it, and they have very big games ahead of them. And facing Cruzeiro is just the kind of motivation I believe this team needed to start training very seriously ahead of what's coming up. It will have a couple of players back from injury. And Garnero knows his stuff. He knows his style. The players know what the coach is going to ask from them. So I think it's the perfect setup for a good ending of the year for Libertad when everything was just coming down. Everything was just falling apart. But Daniel Garnero, I think, is going to bring it back up, and hopefully they go through Cruzeiro, guys. I mean, I'm really rooting for this team. This is the only team we have left in the international stage. So from now on, I will have the Libertad jersey on.
Although I don't think a lot of fans can say that about Libertad, Fede. Let's be honest. I don't think a lot of fans are still, as much as Libertad have been kind of the big team for Paraguay in the last few years in international tournaments, they still don't want to see them win. Let's be honest.
Of course not, Roberto, especially Cerro Porteño and Olimpia fans. No, no, they don't want this team to keep on growing. They don't want this team to get more titles. They want to start having their own titles, especially because with what we've seen these last couple of years. I mean, it's just been Libertad, Libertad, and Libertad. And Garnero, Garnero, Garnero. I mean, Garnero did it with several other teams also. So now that he's back, I mean, he's going to get that respect, I believe. But I don't know. There's a lot of things that happen in Libertad. You have Horacio Cartes behind the scenes also. He's been kind of distracted lately. That's what a lot of people are saying, that he's not going to Libertad. He's not at the practices. He's not with the players that much as he was at the beginning of the year. So clearly that also affects, the motivation. There was even rumors that the players weren't getting paid, which is something very weird at Libertad, which is the team that has the best budget. The president said this was not real, and that the players were focused, but you could feel that they were not responding to Galliano. And you saw that this team played a lot better, Ralph, with Garnero. You saw this team play a lot better in the Apertura. I know Cerro pretty much handed it to them because they had the opportunity to win it. But I mean, Libertad has been one of the top teams during the year. So we're now facing off Cruzeiro. I'm still believing in this team, guys. I don't know. I think they could do it, especially with several of these guys playing, probably one of their last tournaments. Roque Santa Cruz, Christian Riveros, even for Tacuara. It's still a very special moment for all of these guys that are still in that locker room.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think, a feeling like you were saying of maybe almost coming to an end, and they felt the end was there when Garnero left for the national team, I think. So this is maybe like you're saying, this last chance to really have a go. And you look at players as well, like Alejandro Silva, who's been to a Copa Libertadores final playing with Olimpia. Of course, he has that experience. He was a player, one of the biggest critics, I think, of Galliano. From what we're hearing, he did not get on very well with him. He was not responding. So having him back with Garnero, who he played with also in Olimpia, I think is going to be important to get all those experienced players kind of on the same page again and working forward. Though I must say, we always said this about Garnero, and we saw it in Copa America as well. He does struggle though in the big games in international competition. That's always been trying to find the right balance of having so much attacking talent, but not always being able to play and have 70% possession, which they did yesterday against another Paraguayan team that they know really well. But they sometimes struggled in those bigger games where they can't have the ball as much, or that the other teams are just really good at picking them off. So it's going to be a really tough challenge against Cruzeiro, but it would be great. Like Fede is saying, we want to see Paraguayan teams do well. We want to keep talking about them long into the year. And how funny would it be to see Libertad in the final of the Copa Sudamericana in Asunción, when all these other teams wanted to be there, right? They get to play basically a home game should they get to the final.
It's going to be very interesting to see what happens as we switch gears to what happened also on the weekend was the Superclasico. We saw Olimpia take it on Cerro Porteño, a big game for both these two teams because both the sides had come through different circumstances, you would say, heading into this game. So it was very interesting to see how Olimpia and Libertad got to it. And Olimpia got off the right foot. They got on the right foot, and it looked very well for Fede initially. In his prediction, Lucas Prato scoring the opening goal for Olimpia right before halftime. But then in the 84th minute, it was a penalty for Cerro Porteño. Robert Pires da Mota actually scoring the penalty to make it 1-1 and to finish it at 1-1, Fede. So not the draw you wanted, not the draw I think Olimpia wanted or what Cerro wanted. Maybe those de Mayo could feel very happy of the result as well, given their circumstances. But yeah, these teams, they didn't need this result. I think they definitely needed to get the win to put themselves in a more comfortable position in the Clausura, and they couldn't do it.
It was a fun game, right? I think, the first half you felt like Olimpia was the better team, or the smarter team, even though they didn't have the ball. This is a team that doesn't want the ball that much. They want the open space. They want those long balls, especially after Richard Ortiz has come back into the midfield. They do have very experienced players. The veterans are very important. I mean, talk about the game that Gaston Olveira has played in the Superclasico. I mean, he was the big star for his team, stopping absolutely everything in that second half. But he's been playing that way lately. I mean, to me, the way I see, he's been the best goalkeeper, and no doubt about it, in the Paraguayan league lately. Not just this year, last year also. And he's been unstoppable. We were talking about it, I believe, on the chat. I mean, I think it was Rap that mentioned it, or you, Roberto. 2 goals received this whole year, and they've come up from penalties. They haven't been able to score on him, and I think that was something that was on Cerro Porteño's ahead of this game, because they had trouble against Old America the game before, also scoring and opening up the game. So it was Olimpia hitting them up first, even though it was Cerro, having a very good game with Derlis Rodriguez opening it up. A very bad game from Juan Iturbe. This is somebody that I've been expecting to show up in these kind of games. He did it against Libertad in the Apertura. You were waiting for him to have a big game in the Superclásico, especially because they don't have Cecilio Dominguez back yet, who was their leader, scoring in the Apertura and their best player along the year. So you're expecting several players to step up in these kind of games. And also the big signing, Francisco da Costa. He barely had opportunities along the way. And then you had Diego Churin coming in. I mean, what's going on with the center forwards in Cerro Porteño? Nobody's scoring. Nobody's showing good form right now. And, the goals have to come from somewhere else. And it was, surprisingly, it was Gabriel Aguayo coming through in that second half. Somebody that was just coming off from injury, with Robert Pires da Mota. It was very important, that triple sub right now that we're seeing. The coaches have the opportunity to use 5 players. Some of these situations are game changers totally, and it was that way for Cerro Porteño after losing the first half, where I believe Olimpia was smart about it. And talk about players that are built for Superclásico, right? Like Prato again scoring on this team, and having a great game, even though him and Richard Ortiz, we must say, weren't able to play the whole game. I think this was something that benefited Cerro Porteño's game plan, because they found more spaces. It was Gabriel Aguayo going against Zavala, one after the other one, and it was you could see it happening, Ralph. I mean, that goal from Cerro Porteño was just meant to happen. It wasn't happening because Gaston Olveira was stopping absolutely everything. Pachi Carrizo had an opportunity. Derlis Rodriguez had several chances, and Gabriel Aguayo got away in one play from Zavala. The penalty came through, and I think we were just 5 minutes away from Olimpia having the opportunity to celebrate in Cerro Porteño's house, but it didn't happen. It was Cerro Porteño saying, "Oh, at least we got it tied." Nobody was happy about it. I wasn't happy about it, because we got another tie in the Superclásico, and we got to wait for the last one to see if somebody wins it.
We got 7 in a row. Is that now? Yeah, 7 ties in a row in the Superclásico. I read, just so you guys know, this week, I think in Venezuela their Clásico is 8 in a row. So that's even worse than us. But there you go. It's interesting. The game, in a way, it comes down to 2 left backs, right? So Diego Leon, such a good player. He's done really well since he came in 17, but he gets caught out in the goal, in the Olimpia goal, because it's really just a long ball over the top that he doesn't deal with, and then that's crossed into the box. The ball falls to Prato, and Prato scores his second goal in 2 Clásicos, and both like just before halftime and at the same time. And that was really important, I think, thinking about Leon. He's only 17. That's when your legs are getting a bit tired. You're starting to look towards the dressing room, like for the break, and that's when you're tested. And in that moment, he just couldn't stand up. And then you have the other left back, Zavala, who, like Fede was mentioning, really wasn't able to deal with Aguayo. Once Aguayo came on, he did very well to stop Iturbe, I think, or Iturbe didn't play well, a combination of both. But really, Aguayo was getting the better of him before the penalty as well. And then the penalties, like, just almost like something that you saw was going to happen, or something similar was going to happen. So it's funny, right? In a way, these two left backs on both sides have a key moment for the game. But yeah, I mean, I liked Cerro in the second half for sure. But I think Olimpia, like we talked about it in the build-up, they're the much better team at the moment in terms of knowing what they're there to do, and the stability they have in the team we talked about. Because I think it's a really good point to say, just because they didn't have more possession doesn't mean they wanted to have possession. They don't. That's not how they're going to play. Maybe they could have done a bit more in the box. It's true. I think the Prato goal is like only their second touch in the box in the first half. So maybe they could have been a bit more incisive. But in general, the game was going as they expected. I think they're quite happy with it. They weren't really allowing Cerro to do much on either wing until, of course, that end of the second half. And it really interesting, right, that at the end, just thinking about Clásicos and what's been going on recently, that it's Pires Tamoto who takes the penalty and not Churin. Churin, the all-time top scorer in La Nueva Olla, he's usually on penalty duty, but he has missed some big ones, especially in Clásicos. And so Pires Tamoto is the man. He's chosen, and he steps up, and it just shows you how things are shifting in terms of seniority of players. And then just a last one, I wanted to talk about Delis Rodriguez, who I thought had a really good game for Cerro in terms of being the leader in the press and really trying to push and win balls back. And he just had some of that aggressiveness that you would expect in a Clásico, and I didn't really see from a lot of other players. There were a lot of players on the pitch that I thought really were not stepping up to their level for a Clásico. It took Carrascal ages to kind of warm up into the game. He had some really poor passes in the first half. And I've seen that from him before, where he doesn't seem to be at like match fit level from minute zero. It like takes him time to warm up into games, which of course you can't do at the very top level. So I thought it was ultimately the draw was the right result but just because of what Cerro managed to do in the second half. In the first half, with Olimpia winning, for as much as Cerro had more possession, it kind of felt right because they were set up for that, and they hit Cerro how you almost knew they were going to do. But ultimately, yeah, another tie, and it's Dos de Mayo that stay top and are happy with it.
Well, look at what Ameliano have to deal with in the next 3 games, guys. They got Libertad on the weekend. They got Ameliano afterwards. And then to kick off the new month, they got Olimpia. Surely they can't keep it up, Fede. Surely something's going to stop them.
Yeah, we definitely got to talk about Dos de Mayo. I mean, this team hasn't really lost at home during the whole year. I mean, at most 2 games. And one of them was against Cerro Porteño. It was against one of the big teams. But I mean, I've heard from other football players that have gone and played there in Pedro Juan Caballero this year. It's very hard. The turf it usually gets wet at night because of the humid atmosphere in the city. So they've been very strong at home, and I believe that this team is building up something special ever since Felipe Jimenez took over in second division. This is a very young coach that's really trying to make a name for him in the first division. I'm really happy to see those kind of stories. And I don't know, guys, it would be a huge surprise if they make it to the last weeks of the tournament with an opportunity to be the champions, obviously, because you have Olimpia and Cerro with the obligation pretty much to win this clausura to make it to the Libertadores. But as of right now, Dos de Mayo is really in that fight. I mean, we have Libertad already qualified because they were the first champion, but you have an open spot for the second champion. And as of right now, they're really close in points during the year with Olimpia, who didn't have the best apertura. You're seeing Olimpia now with a better script. They know what they want from Palermo, the players, but you're having Richard Ortiz, who can't play 90 minutes. You're having Prato that can't play 90 minutes. Derlis Gonzalez hasn't been back yet. Ever since the clausura started, and as of Cerro Porteño, they're still missing the veterans. Piris Damota pretty much missed the whole first part of this season. Now they lost Enzo Jimenez to an injury. He was playing in midfield as a starting ever since the tournament began, and I don't know what's going to happen with this team. The fans are not feeling what they're seeing from the team and from Manolo. They have a lot on their shoulders because they didn't make it in the international stage. So I think, it's pretty much open. Libertad has been a very poor team so far. And if Dos de Mayo keeps on winning at home, they might build a championship run. I want to believe. I want to think that this team can go through the whole season winning and winning, especially at home, Raf, and keep on trying to make it to the Libertadores. That would be huge for them, I believe, at the end of the season.
Yeah, about Dos de Mayo's home form, that's really what got them promoted from the Intermedia. That's where they were so strong. And you thought, well, maybe at this new level, they wouldn't be quite as dominant, but they've managed to do it. I think, like Fede says, some of the conditions up there, they're right on the border with Brazil, basically like almost entering the Pantanal kind of region. You don't have to go that much further and you're there. So just to give people an idea of what conditions might feel like. But also they remind me a lot of Trinidense when Trinidense first got promoted, like a young Paraguayan manager. They're not really full of stars, but they're full of players that have done quite well in different moments in different teams, like Brian Ayala, for example, who was always very good at other teams. He just had some issues with injury that never really got him his big move. So he's managed to Felipe Jimenez has managed to put that team together, and they work very well as a unit. But these 3 matches coming up, I think Libertad at the weekend away, that's going to be really tough. But the Olimpia game, although they're away, if I'm not mistaken, I think they might be going to Encarnacion. So they're not actually playing that one. Like Olimpia, I'm playing at home at the moment, right? Because they're renovating the stadium. So that maybe we could see something there. And that could be, like Fede was mentioning, it's a really huge game for the Copa Libertadores, because those teams are fighting for the kind of accumulativo and the amount of points they have at the end of the year, the annual table, which can decide some positions. So I could really see that being a very big game. And if Dos de Mayo come out on top, then we're almost halfway through the season with them ahead. They would be possibly 3, maybe 5 points ahead of Olimpia. So it's going to be a really interesting battle. Cerro, if we're just talking about the title race, Cerro still don't convince me, because they have flashes where they're very good. And they've put together runs, I think, of 3 or 4 games sometimes where they win like 3-0, 4-0. And you think, okay, now it's going to happen. And then it doesn't, because they tie at home to somebody, or they can't win an easy game. And so there's not really that confidence they can do it through the whole season. So you are looking more at the Olimpia. What will Olimpia do? And maybe not so much if they can hold off Dos de Mayo, but will they be able to hold off Libertad, who I think will kind of come roaring back? And starting with this win over Dos de Mayo at the weekend, if they beat Dos de Mayo at the weekend, they're cutting the gap now only to 5 points from the leaders, or possibly 6. So it's you really want to keep an eye on Libertad as they start to move forward. And I think it's more on Olimpia than Cerro in terms of who could be the different champion for this Clausura.
Well, someone that's been keeping an eye on what's been happening in the Clausura is, of course, the new manager, Gustavo Alfaro, because he was officially announced, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, as the Paraguay manager. He gave kind of his inauguration speech, you would say, at the press conference last week, and he had a couple of things to say. Ralph actually had a really good thread regarding the few key points from that press conference. If you want to go check out his Twitter account, it's right there. And I'm just looking at what he's been saying. He's really kind of given this sort of motivational sense of saying what he wants from his team, because I think he is a big motivator. I think he is focusing on the mentality. That's why he's bringing in a sports psychologist to help really this Paraguay team, which desperately need some sort of confidence. But also, I think he said that, the football won't be pretty, but hopefully it'll be effective. I think, certainly this sort of pragmatism, he had one quote where he says that if you can't win, you have to learn how to draw, because this is about accumulating points. That really gives us an idea of what the pragmatism we give. But also, I think the big thing as well is where he says the doors are open for everyone. I think certainly that is something that, he said, he said that put aside personal problems. It's not an obligation, that you have to play as a fan of the national team like you were a kid that nobody is above the national team, that is an invitation, a commitment, an emotional feeling. So you got a bit of, kind of patriotism and motivation from Alfaro, but ultimately it's really the sense of, look, I'm here. I want to play this way. This is the way I want to do it. And he's going to stick with it. I mean, Ralph, I mean, what did you think of really the first impressions of Gustavo Alfaro in that press conference last week?
I mean, firstly, it's very long, right? I was in the Copa America sitting through 15-minute, 20-minute press conferences with Garnero. Of course, it was different, right? It was match situations. But then this was like 90 minutes of Alfaro talking, responding to questions. He's obviously a person that enjoys being in front of the press and kind of putting out some of his philosophy, I think, on football and his dreams he has for the national team. There was a mixed response, I felt, and maybe I'm somewhere in the middle, because there's some people that were like, this is amazing, this is what we need, this mentality, the positive, we have a good team. And then there's other people who are like, oh, is this, they say in Paraguay, we talk about vende humo, is he like a smoke screen, is he a smoke seller, is this actually going to happen? So we've heard it all before. With some people were thinking as well, as we've had this long chain of Argentinian managers that are known to talk very well. So there was like that kind of mixed reaction, I guess. I mean, I think what for me, the from all of that 90 minutes, which is a lot of talking, but what I really took from it that I thought was interesting was he was very clear about keeping the door open for everybody, even if they have problems. And when he said problems, he's looking at Harrison. He's not like looking anywhere else. So I think that was just a message to Tony Sanabria. It can't be like for anybody else, because we understood Sanabria had some problems. That's why he didn't want to come. And it wasn't with the coach. It was with the APF directly, the Paraguayan FA. So I think he's trying to get Sanabria back. You saw some of that. And then a lot about the mentality and the mentality of getting points. He kept coming back to the point that the World Cup qualifiers is just about who has more points, not who has more wins. He was very kind of adamant on that. And so we're not going to see some amazing football. I don't think we're going to see very effective football. It reminds me a bit, in terms of more recent coaches, it reminds me of Ramon Diaz. When Ramon Diaz was in charge of the team, we didn't play great football, but we did get some really important results in terms of draws, right? I remember the draw with Brazil, and I think in the Copa America and these kind of things, we were starting to really play this like hard to beat football, but we weren't very exciting. So I think we're going to see something like that, and it's going to be a total change, really, from the kind of more idealistic football of Garnero, of Berizzo had a very idealistic plan, even though it ended up being so defensive from the way it came out. But I think what we're going to see is, and so one more thing he mentioned that reminded me is he did talk about the Olympic team and some of the things he saw, which he saw as identifying with traditional Paraguayan football. So I think that was also a nod to what Haras Aguirre was doing with that Olympic team. And that's the most Paraguay team we've seen in recent years. So I think we're going to see something very similar as well. A lot of high tempo, high pressing, maybe at the start of games, which takes us to Costa Rica, right? Remember, he was in charge of Costa Rica against Paraguay, and that's what they did at the very first 5-10 minutes. They were just winning the ball high up and created 2 chances and 2 goals. So, well, I think we're going to see some elements of that. That's what I took from that very long kind of press conference and speeches from Gustavo Alfaro.
Yeah, I'm definitely not expecting it to be pretty, especially against Brazil and Uruguay, which are going to be the first 2 games that he's going to have to manage. But talk about a long press conference, right? I mean, talk about a long speech. I mean, I don't think this is what people actually wanted, especially because this is somebody that likes to speak a lot, likes to use these phrases and just throw him out there during the press conference. And it felt like he was trying to talk to the country and also to the players, to try to get that compromise from them, to get them on board and be team players, which is something that I talked about before the Copa America. I mean, be brothers out there. I mean, when you're playing with the national team jersey, you're playing for the national team. You're not playing for yourself. And that's something that I think Alfaro is going to try to work on, because I think this is something that he's seeing already being outside of that locker room. I want to see now what he does when he's in there, because that's been the problem for most coaches. But we've never had a coach that has the experience like Alfaro against certain teams that we're going to face, because Alfaro's been there lately. He managed Ecuador, and he knows he just faced Brazil in the Copa America, also with Costa Rica. So he's going to have his strategy, and he's going to want to do that, I believe. So I think we're going to see a totally different team than what we were seeing from Garnero, even maybe on the Carlos, which is what I'm actually waiting for on the list. But my favorite moment of the whole press conference was when he looked at Justo Villar and he looked at Robert Harrison, and he said, I can call whoever I want, right? And they were kind of sketchy about it, but I believe they said yes. But I hope it is that way. I hope it is totally open for him to call whoever he wants, and for the best players to be out there. And because it felt kind of weird. I mean, this last squad, especially with Daniel Garnero, he was coming off obviously from Libertad, but having so many players from the same club and them not showing up, and none of them having the level. I mean, none of these players that play the Copa America are not playing in Europe because Daniel Garnero took them to the national team. They don't have the level. They're not ready for that competition. So I think that's where Alfaro really needs to hit it. We have a whole bunch of players. We have new players obviously also coming through after what we saw in Paris. After what we saw in the Olympics, obviously he fell in love with several of those players. But are they ready? Are they playing after the Olympics? Have they been getting enough game time? That's why I believe Alfaro was pretty much at every stadium he could during this last week, trying to see everybody, trying to see who's in shape, who's ready for the competition, because there is no time to waste, Roberto. He just came to Paraguay. He's just knowing the streets. He's just finding his way around, but he needs to build a team right away because Brazil is right around the corner.
Well, Uruguay actually is the first one. Uruguay is the first one on the corner, right? Someone to be there. What a baptism of fire, you would say, as we say here, to start off your qualifying campaign, your managerial campaign as Paraguay manager, and then Brazil at home. That's two big games for Alfaro, and he has to get it from the get-go. I mean, yeah, I'm actually curious about what you said, Fede. I want to go to Ralph on this one because I think we do have a good bunch of players that are established abroad and have demonstrated that they can play abroad. So I'm really curious about what in technical terms, like the ratio of like how many players will be dominated from the from the local league in comparison to the those that play abroad. I think certainly you have a bigger advantage if you're playing abroad, but of course, again, like Fede had said, who's in shape, who's having the form that he's had. Of course, Ramon Sosa just made this move to Nottingham Forest, but how's he doing? He hasn't played since that Copa America game. The last time he scored was the last time he played. We'll see what he does in England in the short span of time that he has before, if he does get called up, which I think he should. But for Enciso, how's he feeling? How's he getting his injury? How's he recovering from this injury after a long campaign playing Copa and the Olympics? Almiron, what's his condition? Is he someone that is going to be a starter, or are we going to have to make that conversation of like, no, we need to move on from him and put him as a sub? The same for players like Gustavo Gomez, for Damian Boadilla, who scored, and Fabian Valbuena. There's so many players out there abroad that we have to figure out, like, are they really up for it? Or is it just a case of just saying, they play there, they are on this team, and they should be considered. But if they're not getting their fitness, then that gives the majority of someone who is playing locally, maybe from the Olympic team, to take that spot.
Well, I got from Alfaro that he won't mind about things like current format clubs or fitness. Obviously, they have to be match fit, but he feels that he's good enough of a motivator. He will get the best out of them. So, by the way, I think Gustavo Gomez is coming straight back in the team because I think he's thinking, well, Gomez is probably the best defender we have if he plays like he used to at Palmeiras, because, by the way, he's even starting to get criticism at Palmeiras at the moment as they went out in the Copa. He's like thinking, I can just get the best out of these players. So I think we'll see more of that. But when you mentioned the local league, of course, in Ecuador, he has that famous case where he calls up a guy from the second division in Ecuador that no one have really heard of and managed to kind of build him up. And I think he's now playing in Belgium or in Netherlands. So I think he will have this feeling of, if I spot some talent in the local league, I'm also good enough to develop that player. Although I don't think we'll see that so much in this first call up, which is coming as we record, right? It's coming very soon. Today, I don't think we'll see him make too many crazy moves or changes at this moment because it's so soon. But I do think he's gonna pick all the big names and think, I'm the one that can get the best out of them. I can motivate Almiron, or I can get Enciso and Balbuena to be friends again. Well, maybe they were in the Olympics a bit, but in the Copa America they weren't. So maybe I'm gonna get this team where it needs to be. And I think expect some of the bigger names, and probably if he's managed to work out everything he wants, he's getting Sanabria back, because you're talking about players that are playing. Well, Sanabria pretty much has been starting at Torino. He doesn't play 90 minutes, but he's a regular in Serie A as a striker. So I'm pretty sure he's looking to there. And then if you just want players that are in fitness and doing well, then it's all the Brazilian-based guys, because they don't stop playing. They've been playing a lot, but they've been having really important roles. Like at the top of the show, you talked about Damian Boadilla, who also came on. I remember against Colombia in that first game, when he came on, he did very well. He maybe didn't manage that high level throughout the tournament, but I think there's some of those Brazilian-based players you're going to see a lot of as well.
Yeah, even mentioning some of the other players are on form. Alex Arce, someone that he scored on the weekend. He scored the other day as well. I think he's certainly someone that is obviously going to be an interesting player to watch. I mean, he's already on what, like 26 goals or something like that in this year alone. So what's going to happen to him, Fede? I mean, yeah, there's just a lot of questions. I think ultimately we have to see the lineup, the squad list before we make some distinct conclusions, because I think when we see like some of the players that he's calling up, it obviously presents an idea of like what kind of team he really wants to go for and what kind of, styles tactically, like what would work best for him.
I love that you brought up Alex, or I should say Erling Arce, because his numbers have been crazy this year. I mean, he's top scorer as a Paraguayan player. I mean, you don't find, I believe, anybody else on that list. I think there's a Chinese player on top of the list as the player that has scored the most goals during the year. But then you got all Europeans top, right? And then you have Alex Arce, who's just been killing it and scoring just so much. And we've struggled so much with the center forwards. The last game, I believe, against Costa Rica, it was Alan Barreiro starting that game, and I don't think he's even going to get a call up, to be honest, right now. I mean, look at him. He's been as a sub. He hasn't been stable yet in his new team. This week, River played Libertadores, and it was Borja coming back, not him getting a second chance being a starter after he did play the first game against Talleres, the away game. So he's kind of losing his spot in River with the new coach. You have that situation with several players, a lot of them just coming back to their season, just coming back to their clubs, as you mentioned, Roberto, especially the European players. How are they right now to really play these two games? And then you have to think about and put it into balance what Ralph said. Are we going with the veterans again? Are we going with the young players? Because they're the ones that are shouting out there. They're the ones that are pretty much showing up lately. I mean, I don't forget that Julio Enciso said after the Copa America, we're the ones that are going to take over, the young guys. And I think there's kind of a division also in the locker room that Alfaro is gonna have to fix or work on and bring everybody together, or make a decision and say, I'm not gonna call Gustavo Gomez anymore. I'm not gonna call Miguel Almiron until they're back in their top form. I even heard Eddie Howe this week from Newcastle. The manager said, we're trying to get that best version from Miguel Almiron again. That guy that we had 2 years ago that made the difference in every game that we played. We don't have that guy right now, and we haven't seen that guy in the national team. So maybe right now it's time to stop the ball a bit with some of these veterans and call new players, try and see new guys. I'm not with Raf on this one. I think Gustavo Gomez has had enough opportunities. Why not give that opportunity to a new kid on the block? Another center back that hasn't had the opportunity. Alderete played very good Copa America. I believe he has to stay in that defense. And the last captain was Fabian Balbuena. I don't know. I don't know what kind of defense he's going to try to build. I do think we're going to see different guys on the sides on that defense. He's going to have to bring a new right back to fight Gustavo Velasquez, another left back, because Nestor Jimenez is probably not going to start on this team like he did with or under Garnero. And I'm really looking forward to what he's going to do in the midfield, because we need a creative player out there. And like I mentioned on the last episode, he knows Kaku Gamarra very much. He knows other players, and he's looking at the scene, Roberto. And what I saw that he did in Ecuador is look at the young players. So I think that's going to be one of the things that he's going to look at the most. He's going to look at the new players. He's going to see what he can build from. And I think we're going to see a new, exciting young team from Alfaro. Maybe on these two games, we don't see it yet, but I do believe that eventually he's going to try to build that very young team that's going to surprise the whole qualifiers.
Yeah, that's where I feel he'll get to eventually, but I'm not sure for this call up if he's going to be ready to kind of make these big decisions without having seen everybody. But it's a really good point, actually, just thinking now about who are our fullbacks going to be, because Garnero did really rely very heavily on local league players or veteran players, and you have really the most exciting right backs or fullbacks, I should say, sorry, in Paraguay are the attacking ones. But you don't know if he's really going to want to play with attacking players. Alan Nunez, Alexis Cantero, who actually ended up playing in midfield with Haros Aguirre. You think about Blas Riveros, if you wanted to think about a good left back that's playing abroad. But these are all very attacking players, and I don't know if I can't see how that will work for him. He obviously worked with Junior Alonso in Boca, so maybe there's that other central defender going to left back again. We might see, which I think we're a bit tired of, all of us here, right? Because we've seen how that can affect the balance of the team. But we might end up seeing something similar. We did see the last time Costa Rica on Alfaro team with Costa Rica played against Brazil, they did that double marking in Vinicius. So again, you might have like maybe we end up having, I don't know, two right backs playing instead of a right midfielder. So you have no space for Almiron. Who knows what's going to happen, right? But yeah, I do think it'll be very interesting to see how he balances up this team. But I still feel he's gone more with this conservative approach for these call-ups, and probably actually for the rest of the year. But you might start seeing next year, when he's had more time and a bit more of like knowledge of the scouting and of Paraguayan football, then you might see some really surprising decisions, because it was the way he did it in Ecuador and also with Costa Rica. I mean, that team was a total generation change, and really, you know, worked very well in the Copa America. So I think that's where he wants to get to. But today, I'm not sure we're going to hear too many surprises in his announcement.
We'll definitely have to wait and see what happens. We'll see what happens, obviously, with the national teams. We gear up, obviously, for the World Cup qualifiers. We'll be back previewing it, as we always do, for those games against Uruguay and Brazil. And we'll see what happens there. Obviously, we'll keep in touch of what's been going on in Paraguayan football. As always, obviously, close out another great episode of Guarani Vision. For myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Ralph Hanna, thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.